Okay, here we are for number 3 on the graphing review. And this one is challenging because you have to use synthetic division. So remember that whole unit 2 really focused on factoring and synthetic division. And so you definitely want to go back and review how do you do synthetic division and how do you factor. And so we are going to have to use synthetic division here. Whenever you have to use synthetic division, I always start with this constant, whatever this value is. I always start with factors of that. It can be 1, -1, 2, -2. So what numbers am I multiplying together to get -6? That's where I start. Another thing that I do is I take my graphing calculator and I go ahead and put this function into my graphing calculator. And, having a graphing calculator, it's not going to tell you the zeros, the linear factors, the intercept, the range, all those different things. But what it can do is it can help you to be wise about the numbers that you pick for your synthetic division. So if you put this function into your graphing calculator and you zoom in and you look at where does this function cross the x-axis, that is going to allow you to start identifying some of your zeros. So when I put this function into my graphing calculator, I see that the function crosses the x-axis at 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my synthetic division using a 0 of 1. Okay? So then I'm going to write down all my coefficients. So I'm starting with 1, and I've got 2, then I've got -11, +16, -1, and -6. And this should work out because I've already looked at my graph and I know that it crosses the axis at 1. So I'm going to start my synthetic division process. So I'm going to bring down the 2. 1 times 2 is 2. Okay, -11 and 2 is -9. 1 times -9 is -9. 16 and -9 is +7. 1 times 7 is 7. -1 and 7 is +6. 1 times 6 is 6. And I get a remainder of 0. And that is what I should get because I know that 1 is one of my zeros. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. Now, this right here is 2x to the third minus 9x squared plus 7x plus 6. And that 0 is my remainder. Now, hopefully I could factor this. In a perfect world, it would be factorable, but it's not factorable. So we are going to have to do synthetic division again. And so I am going to, again, look at that graph, and I notice that it also crosses the x-axis at 2. So I know that 2 is another one of my zeros. So I'm going to take my coefficients, and I am going to do synthetic division again. Okay, so I bring down my 2. 2 times 2 is 4. -9 plus 4 is -5. 2 times -5 is 10. Sorry, it's -10. I'm left with -3. 2 times -3 is -6, and I get 0. So now at this point, I have 2x squared minus 5x minus 3. Okay? So that is my quadratic that I'm at. So I have one of my zeros here is 1. One of my zeros here is 2. So I already have those listed. Now I am going to need to erase some of this so that I can factor my quadratic. Okay, so we've got our quadratic down here. I've already got 2 of my zeros. So I've got to factor 2x squared minus 5x minus 3. So again, I'm going to do sum and product. I have to figure out my sum and figure out my product. My sum is when I multiply my A times my C. Sorry, my product is when I do that. I apologize, I misspoke. My product is when I multiply my A times my C. So that is going to be negative 6. That is my product. My sum is my B value. So my sum is negative 5. So I need two numbers multiplied together give me negative 6. Added together give me negative 5. So those two numbers are going to be negative 6 and positive 1. Now in this particular problem right here, I can't just write out the x minus 6 and the x plus 1 because my A value is a 2. So I have got to split this. So I have 2x squared minus 6x plus 1x minus 3. So I'm going to see what I can factor out of my first two values, which is a 2x, and then I'm left with x minus 3. My second two terms, I can't factor anything out, so that is just a plus 1. And so then I'm left with x minus 3. So my two factors are 2x plus 1 and x minus 3. So I still need my zeros there. So if I put each one of these equal to 0, I end up with x equals negative 1/2 and x equals 3. So those are two more zeros. So negative 1/2 is a 0 and positive 3 is a 0. Now my linear factors are when I write these out to be multiplied together. And we are going to have 4 factors because this is a polynomial with x raised to the 4th power. So I'm going to take each one of my zeros and I'm going to put it into factored form. So if positive 1 is my 0, x minus 1 is it in factored form. Then I have x minus 2, x plus 1/2 because it's actually x minus negative 1/2. And then my last factor is going to be x minus 3. Okay? Now, to determine what my y-intercept is, I am going to plug in 0 for all of my x's. So that is going to be 2 times 0 to the 4th power minus 11 times 0 to the 3rd power plus 16 times 0 to the 2nd power minus 0 minus 6. So what happens then is all of these become 0 and I am left with negative 6. So my y value here is 0, negative 6. My y-intercept is 0, negative 6. Okay, and we'll talk about the range after we go ahead and graph this. I'm going to start with my y-intercept. I'm going to go ahead and put a dot at negative 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's negative. That is my y-intercept there. Now, because these numbers are so close together, my zeros, I'm actually going to make this positive 1, this positive 2, this positive 3, and this positive 4. So what I've done is I've done each 2 units is a whole number. So here, this would be negative 1, this would be negative 2, this would be negative 3, and this would be negative 4. Okay? So that is what I've done kind of with my scale. And I've done that because of how close everything together is. So now I'm going to go ahead and start plugging in my zeros. Okay, so one of my zeros is positive 1, and that's where it crosses the x-axis. Another one is positive 2. Okay, another one is negative 1/2, and another one is 3. And we've also got our dot down here. Now at this point, that is when I am going to look at my calculator and then I am going to draw the flow of the graph. So at negative infinity to negative 1, we are above the x-axis. Then we dip to below and we hit our y-intercept. Then I go back up and I cross the axis again at positive 1. We don't know how far up we go, and so we kind of estimate that, and we don't know how far down we go in between 2 and 3. But at that point, then we go back up. So our graph should look very similar to this one, and we kind of do that final step by looking at what is happening on our graphing calculator. Our final part that we're trying to determine is the range. So our range is always our y values. And so we're going to focus on this right here. That is our lowest point. So I need to know what is my y value at my lowest point. And it is negative 6 at my lowest point. So my range is going to be negative 6 to infinity.